You're watching TRT World. We'll start this hour with the latest on our breaking news coming out of Israel and Gaza. According to Israeli army radio, the Hamas chief, Yahya Sinwar, has been killed in a military operation in Rafah at the Tel al-Sultan neighborhood. According to the Israeli version of events, Sinwar was with at least 2 other Hamas members when an exchange of fire took place. Let's get more on this now from our correspondent Nizar Sadawi. He joins me in the studio. Nizar, you were a correspondent there in Gaza for several months after this war broke out. First of all, just take us through the information that we have on the circumstances of what is reported by Israel as being the death of the Hamas chief.
Well, I think the key word here is reported by Israel. Hamas has not confirmed this yet. They will, and if there is a confirmation, if it is true that Sinwar was killed, which Israel says 99% it is true, it won't be just a regular announcement. It will actually be a eulogy for Sinwar, mourning the loss of Sinwar. This is how it happens all the time, because over the course of so many years, Hamas has lost so many of their top leaders and commanders, whether political leaders or militants. It doesn't really matter for Hamas. Yes, it would be a blow, but it doesn't mean that Hamas will be finished. It doesn't also mean that the war will be ended. That's the key element here, because for the people of Gaza, Palestinians there, I'm very sure now that they are in a state of confusion, and they worry about the repercussions of this, because if it is true, it would mean more retaliation from Hamas allies, for example, Hezbollah, from maybe Iran itself, or any other part of Iran's proxies, as Israel calls them. So that's the thing. It means that the negotiations that have been stalled for months, that have faced so many setbacks over the past few months, especially the past few weeks, I mean, they will become more complex. They will be hurdled further and further and further. And we have been watching what's happening in Gaza, in Lebanon, and across the Middle East, and we've been seeing how the political and geopolitics, all dynamics have been shifting repeatedly because of the Israeli plan that no one knows of, actually. Israel continues to change their approach, whether in Gaza or any other part. They keep killing leaders, and then they talk about negotiations or going back to the ceasefire talks, and then they kill someone else or attack Lebanon or an Iranian embassy in Damascus, for example. So that's the thing. It doesn't appear for the Palestinians in Gaza that this war is ending anytime soon. And to be honest, they're also focused on what is happening in northern Gaza. But for Hamas itself, the loss of someone like Yahya Sinwar, it's definitely different. This isn't just a political leader, a senior official in Hamas. And it's not just because Yahya Sinwar is the head of Hamas in Gaza, or, he has become the head of Hamas all in all after the killing of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran in September. But the thing is, for the people of Gaza, Yahya Sinwar holds much greater significance. He's the one leader of Hamas that has strong ties with their armed group, Al-Qassam, the militants of Hamas. His brother is a top commander in Al-Qassam, Muhammad al-Sinwar. Yahya Sinwar is the one leader in Hamas in Gaza who managed to interfere in everything successfully. He even participated in social events. He's the man Israel claims is responsible, the mastermind of the October 7 attack. So the thing is, what would that accomplish to Hamas? I'm talking about people here. People will definitely be thinking about Hamas itself, and of course about themselves, whether the war will continue or not. Some would say that the war may end because Israel might claim that they have achieved their goal. They've been talking for months now about dismantling Hamas, which they didn't manage to achieve. But if Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, comes on air, for example, and says, well, we killed the man responsible for the October 7 attack, does that mean that the war will end? Would that be enough for Israel? Where do we draw a line? That's the question that not just Palestinians, by the way, but everyone in the world is asking now, where to draw a line. When will it be enough for Israel to actually stop this ongoing war. I don't believe that this scenario is more likely, because it's quite clear now that Israel, and specifically Prime Minister Netanyahu, has many more interests across the region. It's not just about Gaza. And I do believe it might even have something to do with the Israeli relations to other parties in the region, like Egypt, like their presence on the Philadelphia corridor. The operation happened in Rafah, the closest city to the Egyptian borders. Actually, that's where the Philadelphia corridor is located. So I think they will make a big deal out of this. Of course, they will brag about killing a top commander in Hamas, like Sinwar, the top leader of Hamas currently. And of course, Netanyahu will see this as a victory. He would want the Israeli public to see this as victory, but it won't be sufficient for him. I think they will continue in Lebanon, because we have come to a point where a ceasefire in Gaza requires calm elsewhere, not the other way around, which is how this whole thing started.
If we're talking about establishing peace in Gaza, it seems to me there are perhaps two elements to this. There's one, has Israel achieved all that it wants to achieve?
Well, look at Jabalia, to answer your question.
But then secondly, what will the region look like once there is peace? And that brings in elements like you just said, like who will control the Philadelphia corridor?
What do you mean peace? That's the thing, Neil. Israel does not appear to actually want peace. And by Israel, again, I mean Prime Minister Netanyahu. What would this peace mean for his political career? For example, he has already been facing charges inside Israel. He's been facing quite an ordeal, even in Israel itself, with his own public, with his own Israeli citizens. And the fact that this war, it doesn't matter where it is for Netanyahu, in Gaza, in Lebanon, with Iran, that's not the point. But as long as the war is ongoing, he stays in office. He stays in charge of things.
I mean, surely you're not suggesting that Netanyahu wants to just an ever war that keeps going, keeps him in...
Yes, it appears that way, to be honest, because, I mean, look at things. He could have ended this war. There were so many chances that they could have achieved a ceasefire in Gaza. Even this ongoing war with Lebanon now, by the way, even before the ground operation started in Lebanon, Hezbollah said this repeatedly. Nasrallah, before his killing, said this repeatedly. In the war on Gaza, reach a ceasefire in Gaza, there will be calm here in Lebanon. So he did have a chance, more than once. But that's not what he wants, because again, he has a personal and a political interest in keeping this whole thing ongoing, and he clearly wants to change the region itself. It's not just about shifting some political dynamics in the Middle East. It's about maintaining a state of war that would allow Israel and Netanyahu specifically to change the geography itself. This is, for example, what's happening in northern Gaza, in Jabalia refugee camp and the surrounding areas in northern Gaza. They've been under siege for more than a week now. They've had no aid coming in, technically. Hospitals, only 3 hospitals out of 18 are currently operational, semi-operational. And what Israel is doing is that they're still forcing people out only through one route. By the way, because before 2 days ago, Israel was ordering people to evacuate and people would leave their homes but still remain in the northern region of Gaza. Now they've only given them one choice, to go through Salah ad-Din, which means if people choose to actually leave Jabalia or Beit Lahia, they will have to go to central and southern Gaza. What does that tell us? Emptying the northern region. This is technically the general's plan that Israel has been talking about repeatedly, especially in recent weeks. The one that was broadcasted by a retired general, Israeli general, Giora Island, last month in September. That's the reality. It's not just Israeli media talking. This is what's happening on the ground. And they keep attacking schools. They keep attacking hospitals. All of this is happening while they're also planning on killing Hamas officials to say to their public that they managed to dismantle Hamas, because obviously they failed in the north. This is the 4th time they enter Jabalia. And by the way, what happened in Rafah today, this clash, because it did happen, according to TRT word sources, there was a clash in a certain building in Tel al-Sultan that's in the western part of Rafah. At least three people were killed. Israel was surprised to realize that one of them might be Yahya Sinwar. It wasn't a planned operation. It was more of an how do I put this? It was by luck. That's the thing. And they may change the course of this entire war because of a lucky incident. It was incidental event.
Do you think it will change it for the better or for the worse from the perspective of Palestinians?
From the perspective of Palestinians, it's always for worse. Because bad things keep happening. Good things never happen for them. And the world keeps watching them and nothing is changing.
Let me just put something to you, because Benjamin Netanyahu at the start of this conflict set out his goals as he put it to his own public, and one of them was to eradicate the leadership of Hamas. And
yes.
the death of Sinwar would bring him one step closer to that. He's already seen the death of several Hamas leaders. So is there not a point at which the Israeli public will go, well, you've kind of set out what you achieved to do in that sense?
But where are the hostages? Because you're talking about goals. He started this war with two goals. First, to eliminate Hamas, and the second was to bring back the hostages. The 101 at least hostages still held captive by Hamas in Gaza. How many of them returned? None. That's the thing. So technically, he hasn't achieved anything. Even the first objective, by the way, even the first one. By killing Sinwar, let's say for a moment that their reports are true. If we were to say that this is true, does that mean that he ended Hamas, dismantled Hamas? Because this isn't the first time that top leader of Hamas is killed. Let's be honest, it happened before. Abdulaziz Rantisi, Ahmed Yassin, many other senior commanders, Salah Shahada, Nizar Rayyan. It's a long list, Neil. Even the same thing, by the way, is happening in Lebanon, and the Israeli public is aware of this. He killed Hassan Nasrallah and Hashim Safiyuddin. What happened? Do we still, or do we not still see rockets being fired from Lebanon towards Israel, even though they actually entered the Lebanese territories? But the fighting is still continuing. It is somehow, I mean, only in terms of rockets, it is still an exchange of fire, which means that they're still operational. Hezbollah is still operational. The same thing for Hamas. Yahya Sinwar was leading the battle in Khan Yunis, which took 4 months. They destroyed more than 80% of Khan Yunis' infrastructure, hospitals, schools, streets, everything, houses, civilian buildings. And they said the main purpose of that operation was to kill Yahya Sinwar at the time. What happened after that? Nothing. They had to pull out their troops, and then they came back again and again. The same thing is happening now in Jabalia, and they have to find some sort of rationalization for this.
I want to bring it back to the most important people in my perspective, which is the citizens of Gaza, who, now you will have a very good understanding of how they think, having spent so much time around them. They're suffering tremendously, unimaginable pain and loss at the moment. They see a Hamas leader, it seems, killed.
Okay.
What are their hopes at this point? Do they look to Hamas as some kind of hope? Because there is, as you explain it, there seems to be no end in sight of the Israeli assault upon them as people. Are they at this point looking to Hamas as their only hope of getting out of this? And how would they interpret the death of Hamas's leader?
Well, to answer your first question, hope is one thing, expect is another. They certainly hope that the war would stop, but they don't expect that to happen.
But how is the question?
That's it. It's not, for Palestinians, it's not about Hamas. They understand that it's about Israel, and that the world, the international community and the mediators need to put more pressure on Israel until this war stops. It's not about Hamas for Palestinians, because Hamas was willing to go for a deal, a ceasefire agreement. They said this publicly and repeatedly. Right? It was the Israeli side, specifically Netanyahu, who kept making amendments to every single ceasefire proposal. So for Palestinians, it's not as important whether Hamas's leader is killed or not, because these people are more focused on survival now, especially the ones in the north. These people are losing their children, not just to the bombardment, but even dramatically worse sometimes, to starvation. Imagine this, people living in tents on the street, watching their children, their babies, dying of starvation, and the world keeps talking about this. Whenever they get a chance to find some internet connection, they hear about solidarity protests across the world. They listen to some fancy speeches by world leaders, but they don't see anything changing on the ground. So for them, it's not about the fighting anymore. It's about
ending the suffering.
Ending the suffering.
Yeah.
The possibility that maybe one day soon this war would stop, and maybe there will be a chance for them to rebuild their lives. And that's not going to be an easy job, because if you're talking about infrastructure, the fact that more than 90% of the people have become displaced, lost their homes and their families, and so on and so on and so on. I mean, everyone's talking about reconstruction of Gaza the day after. This is what they call it. But for these people who lost loved ones and their entire lives, technically, it's not as easy. It's not a building. A human soul is not a building that can be easily rebuilt by funding or a few $1 billion, let's say.
Yeah, we often talk about these things, especially in the media, from the perspective of distance, without feeling any of the direct impact of the killing and the suffering. And these are two completely different perspectives. Appreciate you giving us some insight into it, though. Nizar Sadawi with me in the studio. Let's go over to occupied East Jerusalem now. Our correspondent there is Mohammed Al-Qasim. Mohammed, I'd just like to ask you, what's being said in Israel about the reported killing of the Hamas leader? What is being reported, and how? The tone, how has it been reported?
Well, here's what we know. As you know, this is a developing story, and the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has called for an emergency meeting for his security cabinet, and he will be meeting with his ministers to discuss this latest news, and probably he will come out with a televised statement to make some sort of an announcement. Now, Israeli media outlets, pretty much all of them, have confirmed that the Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar has been killed in Gaza, and they have DNA evidence coming from the police as well as from the army. They also talk about an authentic picture of Yahya Sinwar dressed in a military uniform with grenades around him, as well as a bullet belt, and it seems that he was fighting. Now, the Israeli military says that they saw a suspicious movement in a building at the top flat, and they targeted that floor with a tank shell. Once they hit the top floor, they sent a drone, and based on images being fed back to the Israeli army soldiers, they identified the face of Yahya Sinwar, and then they made their assumption that he was killed. His body was retrieved, brought back into Israel, and his DNA, at least initially, was DNA test was conducted on Yahya Sinwar in Israel. Now, the head of the Israeli military chief of staff, Herzi Halevi, Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, head of the Shin Bet, also Ronan Bar, are all in the south at the Gaza border, holding an assessment meeting, trying to just develop a plan of the way forward following this news, which I believe that soon after this security cabinet is to be concluded, we will get some sort of an official statement, even though Israeli media outlets, pretty much all of them, have conclusively been reporting, according to unnamed Israeli officials, that Yahya Sinwar, Hamas leader, has been killed and not assassinated. And this whole thing happened by coincidence. It was not based on any intelligence. It was not based on any information coming into the Israeli military or the Israeli intelligence agencies, the Mossad or the Shin Bet. So that wasn't based on any information. It was basically a coincidence where Israeli soldiers saw suspicious movement in a building. They targeted that building, and then after that, they found out that they got Yahya Sinwar and he was killed. And just one last thing, Neil, for over a year now, we kept hearing day in and day out that Yahya Sinwar has been disguised in different clothing. He's been hiding among civilians in northern Gaza, in southern Gaza, that top Hamas leaders have been hiding and mingling among civilians in Gaza City, in Deir al-Balah, in Rafah, in Khan Yunis, in Jabalia, in Beit Hanun, in Beit Lahia. And now we find out that Yahya Sinwar was actually fighting with two other Hamas members, facing Israeli soldiers face to face, and all these thousands of children, women and elderly that Israel has killed, claiming to have information on Yahya Sinwar or other top Hamas leaders, hiding among them. Apparently fake news, untrue. Neil?
Mohammed, every week you've been in attendance pretty much at demonstrations taking place in Tel Aviv, Israeli people protesting against their own leader, demanding that something be done to bring back Israeli hostages. Benjamin Netanyahu said at the start of the conflict pretty much two goals: remove the Hamas leadership, bring back the hostages. Do you think for the people of Israel, those people who were demonstrating and wanted the conflict to end, do you think that this death brings them any closer to what they want?
Well, let me answer the second part first. No, they've issued, the families of the Israeli captives issued a statement not too long ago saying that, yes, even though this is a big news, the killing of Yahya Sinwar, but it doesn't mean that their relatives who have been captive in Gaza for over a year now are to be freed. They're not going to be rescued at this point. And even though we most likely will hear Netanyahu claiming that he scored big victory against Hamas with eliminating Yahya Sinwar, still there is about 101 Israeli captives dead and alive still in the Gaza Strip. Now, I just want to add one more demand to the two that you've mentioned, Neil. Not only that Netanyahu last October 7th made three different demands or aims in his war in Gaza, this brutal war in Gaza. He said that he wants to eliminate Hamas militarily and politically. He also said that he wants to eliminate any future threat from the Gaza Strip onto southern Israel or Israel at large, and also secure the release of the Israeli captives. None of those really have happened. Killing Yahya Sinwar doesn't eliminate or crush Hamas's military capabilities. It doesn't eliminate Hamas's ideology from the heads and minds of Palestinians, not only in Gaza, but in the West Bank and elsewhere. And also, by killing Sinwar, doesn't eliminate any future threat from Gaza onto Israel. And so far, the Israeli captives are still in Gaza. And the Israeli opposition leader, Yair Lapid, just in the last few minutes, he came out and he said that we must strive to reach a comprehensive agreement and offer rewards and safe passage to anyone who brings us the hostages. And he also said that Israel must seize the opportunity to act decisively regarding the hostages, which means engage somehow indirectly with Hamas leadership and see if a ceasefire can be reached in Gaza that would lead to the rescue or release of the Israeli captives in the Gaza Strip. Neil?
That's Mohammed Al-Qasim reporting for us there from occupied East Jerusalem. Thank you. Let's go live now to Khan Yunis in Gaza and speak to our correspondent on the ground there, that is Ashraf Shannon. Let's just find out, because amid all these reports that are coming in about the potential death of the leader of Hamas, Israel's continued with its airstrikes and its military assaults on Gaza, with the latest report saying that the Jabalia refugee camp was hit. Dozens of people killed there. Ashraf, take us through the information we've got on those latest strikes.
Well, Neil, one of the attacks on the Jabalia refugee camp targeted the Abu Hussein UNRWA school, a UN-run school that's been used as shelter for hundreds of families. At least 20 people have been killed, dozens more were wounded. Doctors fear that the number of fatalities might increase because of the severe injuries these people have sustained. In addition, Israeli tanks have opened fire in multiple areas in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip. Also in Deir el-Balah, another school was also hit in the eastern part of Deir el-Balah, killing 3 people. During the day, some 16 other people were killed in various Israeli attacks throughout the Gaza Strip, while heavy tank fire and artillery continued to target eastern Rafah and Khan Yunis, in addition to naval attacks on the coastal areas of Rafah and Deir el-Balah area.
It is relentless, the bombardment and the killing. There is no lack of it. Well, there is a lack of is food and medicine. In terms of aid, we heard that the United States, it was a bizarre leaking of that letter to Israel, pressuring Israel to allow more aid into the Strip. Is much more getting in, and is it enough?
Well, it seems that the United States is pressuring Israel to allow aid in, but for Palestinians, when they heard about the letter, they believe that it's the United States telling Israel you have 30 days to kill and maim as many Palestinians as you want. The irony here is that the United States is the biggest supplier of weapons to Israel. Most of the people who were killed during this war were killed by US-made bombs, rockets, and ammunition. And Israel claims to have allowed 30 trucks into northern Gaza yesterday, while sources say that these trucks reached Gaza City. They did not reach the northern parts of Gaza. So 400,000 people are still under siege, without food, without water, since October 1st.
Ashraf Shannon in Khan Yunis with the latest attacks there by Israel. OK, let's bring it back to the studio. Our correspondent, who spent many months in Gaza himself, Nizar Sadawi, is with me to try and make sense of what we're seeing unfolding, the bigger picture. If you're Israel's critic, so if you're someone like the UK who's suddenly realising that 40,000 plus have died, if you're the United States and you're saying this needs to stop now, wouldn't you have laid down some kind of roadmap to say, OK, Israel, what is it you want to achieve? How are you going to achieve it? Once you've achieved it, this ends. I don't see that happening.
Well, of course it's
not
going to happen, because the first objective for Israel is to dismantle Hamas. And the problem with this, whether we like Hamas or not, but Hamas is technically an ideology. It's not just a group that you can go start a guerrilla war with inside a very small strip of land, enclave like Gaza, and then end it in a few weeks or a few months.
You can't kill an ideology. But if you're a Western leader, don't you sit down or have contact with Israel and say, you can't kill an ideology? So realistically, when will you stop the killing? Well, they must ask that question. It's the sensible question.
Like you and I would. Would they? That's the question. I think it's more about alliances. Israel's alliances, their influence when it comes to Western countries, and especially, of course, the US. I mean, you just asked Ashraf a very good question. Are you seeing anything happening on the ground after that message that was leaked from the US government? The answer is no. I can just give you one example. Today, airdrops, aid, 82-year-old man killed because the box fell on his head. This is what the improvement in aid shipment mean on the ground, the reality for Palestinians.
So what the politicians say bears very little resemblance to what really happens.
Well, even in medicine, the first thing you say is you stop the bleeding, you stop the war, and then you talk about the other elements, right? It's not about aid. Yes, they are desperate for aid. Yes, they need food and water and medicine and for patients and wounded to be evacuated and all of these things. Yeah, well, if they do happen, that would be wonderful. We would love this. But the thing is, stop the war first. That's the key thing. That's just number one. Stop the bleeding, stop the war, and then talk. Even, by the way, for Israelis, this is what Palestinians are saying. They don't mind an exchange deal where even the Israelis take their sons and daughters. But that's not the point for Palestinians. They just need the war to stop. And the world should do better.
Nizar, as always, appreciate your analysis of the situation. Thank you for joining me here in the studio. And if you have just joined us here on TRT World, our breaking news story is that according to Israeli Army Radio, the Hamas chief Yahya Sinwar has been killed. Do stay with our coverage. The news continues here. Newsmakers is coming up next.